Hey, and welcome back to another video. Today we're going to be comparing the Boden Essential with a Hils HN3. We're going to start at the top of the guitars and work our way down. Both these models are headless, and I'm going to kind of go over what I like or dislike about every point of the guitars, and then give some insight to some maybe the other headless guitars I've tried in the past. Both of these use a single locking screw to hold the string in place, but you'll notice the Strandberg screws are much bigger than the Hils. Haven't noticed any problem in either of the mechanisms for holding the screws in place. But what I will say is the design of the Strandberg has the string poking through, and some people complain about getting poked. Well, I've never had that problem on the NX, this version of hardware, or the previous version NX, which was revision 5, I believe. And as far as this goes, it doesn't really poke through. What happens is the string comes out here, you cut it off, and it falls into this little channel, so there's no sharp pointy edges that can kind of poke you on there. I think both of these are adequate, but what I think was probably the two best I've seen was the Ibanez Quest series. The locking mechanism actually screws to the back of head, I guess, from the back. And then it had one locking screw for each of the 6 strings. And there was no, and these, beneath the screws, you have the string, and beneath the string is a little metal disc, and beneath that metal disc is a screw to mount these into the wood of the guitar. And lost discs on the Strandberg before. And I think because of that, the Ibanez design is just a little bit superior because you won't have that issue. Yes, the string still sticks out a little bit here, but again, I don't run into the issue where my finger's catching on it. Another adequate design, but still use those little metal discs. Very similar to this one, the NK guitars I've had, the string would go all the way through, so there was no metal barrier here. So you could actually pull the string fully through, and it was much easier to get the locking screw into place. On this one, I had to kind of, let the string get a little bit of slack, put the screw in place, and then pull it through. Or bend the string in kind of like a U shape so it would go under the screw while the screw was already in place around that. And I think that just made it a little bit annoying. And I prefer, a way of doing this without having any risk of losing metal discs. Okay, so another thing to note up here is a lot of people complain about the Strandberg because it's kind of the head of the instrument, or the lack of, is about the same width as the neck, that they can't use a wall hanger for it. I'm going to show you right now that that is untrue. I use a zither stand with a string swing hook. Now, if the hook is facing this way, guitar kind of sit in the middle and fall through if it wiggles. That's not particularly safe. However, I've noticed if you flip the hook upside down, which I think is what you have to do for tellies, the guitar has no problem sitting in the hook as long as it's all the way back. If it ends up being in the middle, it can wiggle free and fall out. I've had that happen to me once. But otherwise, it does hang on a standard spring swing hook. I can't speak for any other brands, but I've never had any issues with these. I've also used the ukulele hooks, and those worked fine too, except the ukulele hooks were a little thin, so the corners of the, I guess, volute, if that's what you want to call it, even though there's not a head, the volute of the neck kind of dug into the rubber and wore it down. The Hils, perfectly fine to hang this way or this way. Not going anywhere. So I think the Hils kind of wins on the design for the headstock. I think the locking hardware for the strings is a pretty equal battle. The bigger screws on the Strandberg helps us win. The flush, no pokey strings portion of the Hils lets it win. The nuts are both, I'm guessing, plastic material. If you buy a Strandberg nut, it says it's some sort of graphite infused material or graphite hybrid material or something jargony like that. Both do the job. Honestly, I've never really had an issue with a headless guitar's nut once it's at the right height. There's no issues with string binding past the nut because there's no tuners past the nut where the string has to be able to slide in and out. So while it's good to make sure the nut slots are cut for the appropriate size string and the right depth, I don't necessarily think the material has a whole lot to do with the string getting bound up in the nut like it would on a traditional guitar. Going to the necks, both claim to be using a rosewood fretboard. I have no reason not to believe them. Both also claim to be using stainless steel frets. Now, just so you know, there are different qualities of stainless steel. You can have a lower end quality stainless steel and a higher end quality of stainless steel, or even hardness. No matter what, any stainless steel fret, as far as I know, should be harder than any nickel fret. So both of these guitars are going to last a long time with hopefully never needing a refret of any kind. They're both 24 frets, and they both have a truss rod. Now, if you look here, the Hils has a spoke wheel truss rod adjustment, and the Strandberg has a typical like top truss rod adjustment. I've heard the argument a bunch of times that spoke wheel is the way to go. It's more modern, easier to access. And honestly, I agree with that with any guitar that has a head. But when you don't have a head and the strings can't be in the way at all, I find that this works perfectly. I have no issue with this truss rod adjustment at all on a headless guitar. Do I like the spoke wheel? Yeah, it works nicely too. But the strings are a little bit in the way, so I have to make sure that I go around the strings when I'm adjusting it. I wouldn't say that's necessarily a win for Strandberg and a lose for Hils or anything like that. I'd say it's a preference thing. Some people are going to like to be able to sit with a guitar and just quickly, do the truss rod here. I find no issue grabbing a Allen key and throwing it in the top of the Strandberg to do my adjustments either. It's a personal preference thing. So I'm going to say that's kind of like they both just did a different thing and they both work well. Okay, coming to the back. This is where the biggest difference of the guitars is. The HN3 has a more modern C-shaped feeling neck. Honestly, it's extremely comfortable and I like it a lot. My favorite guitars, as far as neck go, are the Ibanez SEW back there, my 2007 Highway 1 Stratocaster behind me, and then I played PRS almost exclusively like I played Strandbergs for a while, for several years, and the pattern wide thin and the pattern thin I had played were my favorites, being on the American made CE from, I think it was a 2018. I could be getting the dates wrong. I haven't had the guitar in several years, so I don't remember 100%, but it was a really great neck, and all the SEs I had a lot of SEs, specifically custom 24s mostly, and I love the necks on those. If the SEs had the satin finish neck at the time, it would have been a lot better. I did try a SE CE, and it was good too, and that's kind of what this reminds me of. It reminds me of the PRS's like satin finished neck. That's just like the reminiscence of it. I haven't measured it to know exactly that that's what it is, but if you're used to a Strat or a maybe like a Charvel or the neck on a PRS, unless it's like the, gosh, I don't remember the name, but like the thicker PRS necks, like single cuts, this is probably going to feel pretty familiar. This is where you can argue Strandberg is winning, but again, it comes down to personal preference. We have the Endure neck, which, if you don't know, has 3 flat planes, with the center plane being a twist around the neck. And what this is supposed to allow you to do is have your thumb, trying to juggle guitars here. You're supposed to have your thumb moving along one of the planes. So as you go higher, the plane gets a little bit larger on the top, giving you a little bit more leverage for bends and just being more comfortable playing high up. If you want to play more classically where your thumb is centered, you can follow that again all the way up. And I've never really had to use the bottom plane, but some people will use the bottom plane for something, but I've never found myself on that bottom plane. Now, the big thing is a lot of people are like, well, what if you want to grab the neck? It doesn't stop you from playing to grab the neck here. But what I will say is, as much as I like the Endure neck, and I really appreciate the engineering and like the movement forward that this neck is in the world of guitar, I notice it. And what I mean by that is no matter how long I play a Strandberg, and I've been playing several different Strandbergs with the Endurneck for 3 or 4 years now, I always notice the neck when I want to grab it like this. So if I'm just kind of doing cowboy open chords, that feels like I can feel the edge of the neck. Is it uncomfortable? No, but I notice it. And that's something that I can say just from having this Hils guitar for a day. I don't notice the neck. It goes away. You know, and I think that's a big thing with your guitar is, just getting used to the neck and not noticing so much because it gets it less in the way if you don't notice things about your instrument. Okay. So that's the biggest difference between the two guitars. Now we're going to get to the body, which is pretty similar on both guitars. Say hello to Bridget, everybody. If she barks, I will be sure to pause the video because she'll be very angry at people outside today. So getting to the bodies, they're both humbucker guitars. They both have one volume, one tone, and a switch. The biggest difference being the Strandberg has a 5-way blade switch and the Hils has a 3-way toggle switch. Again, a personal preference thing here. I prefer a 5-way blade switch with no push-pull tone pots. I do not like push-pull tone pots. Just think they always feel finicky and cheap, and I've had problems where like I'll accidentally press it down and not realize, and then I have to pull it back up. So I just don't like them. I prefer a more substantial feeling switch. That being said, there's nothing wrong with a 3-way toggle. A personal preference thing. I think the volume and tone here work fine. The one thing I will say is the placement of the toggle switch when I have phones in my pocket. If it's down and I go to put the guitar here, it tends to flip the switch. So it was in the down position, now it's in the middle. Flip it down again. If I go to put it on my leg. So it's just because of my phones. If I take the phones out of the pocket, it's not a problem. I don't know if anybody else has noticed that same issue, but I think the placement of it is a little inconvenient. If I decide to keep this guitar, I might try to switch placements on where that is. And hey, let's not get grumpy, okay? People are going to the pool. Leave them alone. Sorry. So, other than that, we have just normal kind of setups for the pickups. A 5-way switch is going to have 5 options for sounds. A 3-way with a push-pull tone pot is going to have 6 options for sound. So some people argue this has more tone variations. And you know what? They're probably right. As far as pickup quality and sound, honestly, I don't really like either of them. I think they both lack a little bit of clarity. But they're not bad either. I've heard far worse in more expensive guitars, and I've heard far better in less expensive guitars. I think just whatever the tuning is for these is not what I like. And in fairness, I don't play through a real amp. I play through a Line 6 Pod Go, or sometimes I play through Amplitube or ToneLib GFX. So maybe I'm just missing something in how I'm EQing my sound, but realistically, I just don't prefer the sound of either of them, and I don't think it's necessarily that they're bad. I just think they're less than clear. Moving on to the bridge system. Now, again, this is going to be kind of subjective, but I'm going to tell you what I like better and my argument as to why I like it better. Strandberg, I feel, has over-engineered their bridge. In order to adjust string height, there's a locking screw you loosen. You have to remove the string from the saddle, and then there's a screw inside the saddle to raise or lower the string height. On the Hils, very much like a Strat or Ibanez or PRS style bridge, there is 2 screws on the saddle that raise or lower it in order for you to be able to adjust action height. I like that a lot better, and I have liked that a lot better on any headless guitar I have played. To put this into perspective, Strandberg is the only one I think that I've ever played that had a weird way of doing this. I've had 2 NK guitars, which NK is a pretty small brand from a manufacturer in China. Not sure if anybody's familiar with them, but 2 screws adjust the height of the action. Ibanez Quest, 2 screws adjust the height of the action. Let's see. The Donner NHL 500, which a lot of you have seen my video on. 2 screws adjust the action height. It just seems like the Strandberg's a little over-engineered in that department. Now, is it hard to change the action height on the Strandberg? No. You're probably only going to ever do it once or twice, and then leave it alone. Does it really matter? No. But I appreciate the familiarity in pretty much every other headless guitar I've tried. The only one I've tried that I can't quite remember was I tried an old E-Art GW1 or 2. It was before they had to change the body shape because it looked much like a Strandberg. I don't remember how that one adjusted at all, but I remember the bridge system being a little funky. And I tried a GOC, which I bought and then immediately returned because I could not, life me, turn the tuners on it without significant fight. And I don't remember how that one adjusted either. But the ones I do remember all adjusted much easier than Strandbergs. And I've tried several different Strandbergs. This is the ARC hardware is what it's called. I've tried the NX series, which has revision 7 hardware, and I've tried the pre-NX, which was revision 5 hardware. And all of them relatively more challenging than your typical guitar. Not that it was challenging in general, but more challenging. That's kind of where I think the Strandberg has lost on that, and the Hils has won. Now, the other thing that I think Hils is doing better is intonation adjustment. On the Hils, just like, again, a Strat and Ibanez PRS, it's got 6 Phillips head screws, which hold these long screws with a spring in it, forward or backward to adjust your intonation. If you know how to set up a guitar, you should be able to set this up without any issues. Now, on the Strandberg, and this is going to be pretty hard to see, under the bridge, there you go, 6 holes. Each one takes, I think, a 1 or 1.5 millimeter Allen key. And you cannot use, like I have the Music Nomad screwdriver set, can't use those to adjust those because they're so far underneath the barrels for the strings that you need an actual Allen key. Now the guitar does come with an Allen key to do it, but that's annoying, right? So you have to, first of all, there's a screw in the bridge right to the side of the string. So you can actually adjust intonation while the string is on. That's one of the benefits of the ARC iteration of their hardware. So you loosen that screw, and then you can adjust the intonation using the Allen key underneath. Okay, again, probably only going to have to do it once or twice, and then the guitar will settle in, you'll be fine. But it's annoying. Okay, it lasts a while. I intonate the guitar, it's fine. I don't think I've touched it since I first set the guitar up, and it works. But it was a little weird trying to figure out how it works because it's not the standard way of things. And to Strandberg's credit, they have great documentation. Hi, Bridget. So they did a great job documenting it. The other iterations hardware that they had, the revision 7, revision 5, you loosened a screw, I believe. It's been a while since I've done it, but you loosened a screw and then you had to manually push the saddle forward or backward with the string loosened. Couldn't do it while the string was under tension. This is definitely a upgrade to that, but the Ibanez Quest also used 6 screws. The NK had to be slid forward and backward without string tension too, so that one, same issue as the Strandberg. The Donner NHL 500, which $200 less than this, and about a third, maybe a fourth the price of this. 6 screws to adjust intonation. Worked fine. I think that's kind of where the Hils is kind of winning, is the bridge hardware is just easier. Now, let's go into the bad about the Hils hardware on the bridge. The tuners on this are extremely stiff. Now, pretty much every guitar I've ever had, except for the Strandbergs, and I've owned about 5 Strandbergs, and the Ibanez Quest, had a very stiff tuning experience. So these little barrels spin. Don't know how headless guitars tune, and that's what tightens or loosens it. This is very difficult. Pretty much every guitar that had this, except for, like I said, the Ibanez Quest and Strandbergs, also had issues. The only one I could not get to be better was the GOC, and that's why I returned it. All I do is have to lubricate it, and it's fine. But someone who buys this guitar, let's say you're looking at your first guitar and $550 for a guitar is some people's budget for a beginner guitar. If this is the guitar you go for because you're like ergonomics are a thing, or I hurt my back or hurt my shoulder and I want something that's a little bit lighter, this is your thing, you might not know to lubricate the bridge. It is just metal on metal. Sure, there's some sort of bearing or something inside that you can't see, or maybe nylon washer. When I say bearing, it's like a washer bearing. But it is pretty stiff. I haven't lubricated this one yet. Next time I change strings, I'll take the strings off. I will pull all the barrels fully out. So not disassemble the bridge, but pull them as far back as they go. I will spray them down with, I usually use Finger Ease, which is a string lubricant. And then I'll do the same underneath the saddles for the mechanism side. And hopefully that'll fix any issues with the stiffness. Like I said, it's worked on every guitar except for the GOC. That's kind of where I think this one falls short. The tuning experience on this is very difficult. But like Strandberg, once something's set, they stay in tune. Only had this for about a day and a half though, so maybe it won't stay in tune, but so far it's been doing pretty good. Overnight with a humidity swing, because it was like 35 degrees last night, now it's 70 degrees. To be fair, in the house it probably didn't get below like 66. It stayed in tune, no problem. Humidity's probably jumped about 10% as well, and it stayed in tune. So no complaints there. The body shape, if you notice, like I said, the Hils, I think I said earlier, the Hils is probably about 10% smaller, 5% smaller or something. So kind of that in perspective, I'm going to put the guitars like this. You can kind of see. So the Hils is a little bit smaller than the Strandberg, but not in a way that like it's uncomfortable. It doesn't feel particularly smaller. Like when I play it, I don't really notice. And I kind of had the same thing with the Ibanez Quest. The Ibanez Quest was a little bit smaller, but not in a way that I noticed. That's me. Some people will notice. But what I like about the Strandberg, and I think this is the thing that Strandberg has definitively gotten correct. Playing in this position, it's perfect sized. I have no problem with that guitar playing in this position either. Playing in this position, if I put the guitar on my thigh, I don't have to hold the guitar. It stays exactly where it needs to go. My arm goes over. It's perfectly fine. No issues with the guitar being in this 45-degree angle on my right thigh. Some people will play with their left leg raised and then, have the portion here on the right thigh while the waist of the guitar is on their left leg. Perfectly fine. Stays exactly where it should be. I usually play on my right thigh with a strap, have no issues. I think that's what Strandberg's gotten right. 4 different, Bodens that I've had, all perfectly rested that way. And the one Salin I had rested perfectly like that. The Salin was the NX Deluxe, so it was semi-hollow, and it still rested perfectly balanced. The Strandberg has really got the body design. One of the things I was worried about on the Hils is in order to make the guitar so you could set it down they made the kind of like bottom horns equal. Now, right now, I changed the rubber foot that was here to here and put the strap button here just because I wanted to be able to mount my MIDI pickup. But this is only a little bit longer. I was sitting like slightly angled, but it still sits nicely. Now, the reason I was worried is because this being a little bit lower, the angle seems to be a little bit more down. And it is. It is a little bit more down. And that could potentially mean that it doesn't sit on your thigh and stay in place. So this is about the same spot I would set the Strandberg. If I let go, the guitar falls. Now, if I push the guitar back a little bit, it stays. But one of the things I love about the Strandberg is being in front, my shoulder comes down and not back. I have shoulder and back issues. So pulling my arm back like this is fairly uncomfortable. And I can only play about 15 to 30 minutes, depending on the day, with my arm pulled back before I start to lose feeling in my fingers. With a guitar like this, I can go a couple hours without having any issues. I still have issues, still have pain, still have like the tingling in my fingers, in both arms eventually, but much more sustainable for long periods of time, especially with my job for teaching. I need to be able to do things for a while before a break comes around. So If I let my forearm rest on the guitar, it does stay in this position. So it is good enough that if you're looking for an ergonomic guitar, I think this would be fine for that ergonomic position. Again, but if I let go, it falls. If you want to sit in this position, no issues, no neck dive, nothing. It sits perfectly. No issues there. If I want to play in classical position, here, it doesn't. The curve here does not sit on the right thigh while the waist sits on the left thigh. The angle just doesn't allow it. So I've seen some people will play with like the tuners against their thigh like this. It sits perfectly like that. You see, it's like, it's balanced, it's nice. The one thing I think kind of is not good about this though, is if you have a trem version of these, you might accidentally move the trem. Or if you go to use the trem, you might hit your leg or rip your pants or something like that. So I can't speak specifically to that, but that's kind of how my thought process is for the trem on this guitar. And I wanted to point it out. Now, the other thing that's a little different here is we have this lip. And I think part of that is for the position I was just holding the guitar in. That's great. But what it does is make it a lot harder to grab these barrel tuners. And I think that's part, like they do feel really stiff. I know they're stiff. I think that's part of the reason why it's harder to tune this guitar too, is because that's sticking out. I think they could probably come in like, I don't know, half the distance they have already and make it a lot easier to tune these. They could even maybe, pull the neck in a little bit further on the body and shift the bridge and the pickups back too. I'm not a designer of guitars or anything, but I feel like there's got to be a way around this. It makes it a lot easier to grab those tuners. And I think part of the reason they haven't is because they want people to be able to sit this. And honestly, I think if you want to do that, maybe just adjust this angle. I think that would be a good solution. I know it's really nice to have the guitar stand like this, but I think that's less important than making the tuners easily accessible. Now, the last thing I want to go over, I have not gone into the electronic cavity of this, and I don't know enough about anything other than size of potentiometers to tell you anything about the electronic differences. So the only other thing I want to go over is how the strings are put onto the guitar through the bridge. We already talked about the locking mechanisms at the top. But on the Strandberg, you have a barrel for the string to go through. The string goes through the barrel, and it comes out the top of the barrel. This is a okay design. I think it's probably the best I've seen on a headless guitar. The Ibanez Quest was different. I don't know if I'd say better, just different. And to be fair, this is not the best. I'll tell you which one is the best, in my opinion. The Hils is pretty close to the Ibanez Quest. The way that it works is it top loads through the saddle into a little mechanism underneath the saddle that latches the string. Now, I kind of found the perfect way for me to string the Ibanez Quest, and I tried to replicate that same process for the HN3. And I kept having a couple of the strings slip out of the mechanism as I was trying to lock them in place up here. So some like I think Ibanez even recommended you lock the string first and then you hook it in here and then you tighten it. I'd rather have it locked in at the bridge and then lock it down at the head so that it's just as tight as possible before I start tuning it. This will give me the most range of motion back, tighten the string as possible. And that's what I was trying to do, but like I said, the string kept slipping out. So what I used to do on the Quest was I put the ball end of the string in, tighten it just enough so that the barrel was under the saddle rather than like lined up with the hole in the saddle. So the string wouldn't slip out, but for some reason the strings kept slipping out on this one. Now Donner, the NHL 500, where I think it excelled, was it had the pretty much exact same design of bridge, but the strings went in through the back. There was a flaw in this. If the tuners were not all the way forward, the string could pull all the way through the guitar without stopping. But as long as you had the tuners forward and you pulled the string through, it latched in. It never came out once it was through that mechanism that shifts forward and backwards. And then you'd pull it through the saddle and you never had any issues with it. Now the Donner had another flaw where the saddles got pulled back by the tension of the string. I don't necessarily think that it was a design flaw on Donner's part. I think maybe the string gauge. I think they shipped with 10 gauge strings, and I was using 10 gauge, but something about it was just a little weird. So I put roller saddles on the second one I had ordered, and it fixed the issue without any issue, like without any problems. So there are, I think, a slightly better, there is a slightly better way to take care of this. I think if they did the string through design like Donner did, this bridge would be nearly perfect as far as the way it functions for restringing. And not like I said that the Strandberg's harder, but not it is. I think it is a little harder. It's not that the Strandberg's worse, but it's just a little different, a little bit harder to get used to. Not in a bad way, but just in a different way. So that is my comparison of the Strandberg Boden Essential and the Hils HN3. I'm very interested to try another Hils guitar. I've been looking at it's the HN3 or something. It's like their Strat version of a guitar. And looking at the body shape, it looks a lot more similar to a Strandberg. But based on this guitar, I'm pretty impressed. If you're interested in an ergonomic or a more compact travel guitar, the Hils is definitely going to give the Strandberg a run for the money. It's got very good specs for a guitar that's half the price of this one. And I didn't even talk about, like, the radius on the Strandberg is 20 inches all the way across. This is compound. I think it's 12 to 15.75 inches, which I don't really care too much about compound radiuses. I'd honestly prefer just a standard radius, but some people really like that. And I don't notice it while I'm playing, so it doesn't really bother me. But this is $550 right now. And this is $1,099, at least last time I checked. I believe it's still that. So for half the price, you get an ergonomic light guitar that can easily be traveled with. And if you're like me and you don't like the pickups, upgrade them. Right? Same with this one. You don't like the pickups, upgrade them. But I would have trouble if somebody told me, hey, I'm on a budget, I hurt my back or I hurt my shoulder and I want to buy a guitar. I'd have a problem trying to recommend one of these, unless they were used, the price used. Because this is just so dang good at value for the money. And I know a lot of people thought I was being unfair to the Donner NHL 500 because it was like a $350 guitar roughly. But that guitar is on sale perpetually, it seems like, but it's listed as supposed to be $600, which is more than this. And it had not as good of spec. That's why I like this a lot more, and I would be more inclined to recommend this. If you have any questions about either guitar, please let me know. Welcome back, Bridget. If you like this video and you made it this far, give it a thumbs up, subscribe for future content, and I'll see you guys in the next one.